billion tons per year on this planet. To give you a sense for the planetary boundary on that, it's about 50 billion tons. So we're overshooting the planetary boundary on material extraction and consumption by 40%. And that's what's leading to this kind of progressive degradation we see on all sorts of fronts. Now, crucially, material use, rises almost lockstep with GDP. So the more GDP growth we have, the more growth we have in material use, with again, more consequences for ecology. So as a consequence, we won't be surprised to learn that the vast majority of our ecological overshoot on this planet is being driven by a small number of high-income countries. So high-income countries like the UK consume materially about 28 tons of stuff per person per year, which is an extraordinary amount. That's about 4 times more than the ecologically safe level. To put that in perspective, if we consumed like everybody else in the world outside of high-income nations, we would have no ecological crisis on our hands. The rest of the world does not overconsume in the way that high-income nations do. So if we were to all consume in the world at the same rate that high-income nations do, then we would need 4 planet Earths to sustain that kind of consumption, Now this is important because, and obviously that's an ecological disaster. This is important because that is literally right now the primary objective of what we call international development, that everyone should consume at basically the same rate that high-income nations are consuming. So it's a recipe for a sort of suicidal catastrophe. But let me focus in now for a second. I'm going to leave you with the stuff about material consumption, which is important. Let's focus on the question of climate change for a second. So right now, our trajectory in terms of emissions at business as usual is that we're going to reach about 4.2 degrees Celsius global warming over pre-industrial levels by the end of the century, which is obviously completely catastrophic. Now, you might say, it's okay, we have the Paris Agreement, it's going to save us. If you look at all the nationally determined promises that each nation has made under the Paris Agreement, which remember are voluntary, it gets us to about 3.2 degrees of global warming by the end of the century. No reduction in emissions whatsoever. Now why is that? The reason is because we're projected to grow the economy at such a rate as to outstrip our gains in rolling out renewable energy, in decarbonization. And it's important to recognize that 3.3 degrees of global warming is nothing short of catastrophic. We know that's going to cause mass famine, mass human displacement. Food systems are going to collapse. It's almost impossible for us to imagine our global civilization as we know it, continuing in its present form in any clear way in a world warmed by 3.3 degrees. What the IPCC report tells us is that we have to make much, much more dramatic reductions to emissions than nations have presently been promising. And I wish I could show you this graph, which gives a sense for how steep and dramatic the trajectory needs to be. We're talking about cutting emissions in half by 2030 and getting to net zero by 2045 or 2050. Now, it's again impossible to overstate how dramatic this trajectory is. We have a fossil fuel energy infrastructure that's been built up over 200 years. We have to completely transform it, create an entire new one in only 30 years or less. So the question that everyone wants to know, or wants to know the answer to, is this possible? Can we do it? And the answer, of course, theoretically, is yes. What do we need? We need rapid rollout of renewable energy, specifically wind turbines and solar panels. This is technology we have right now that we need to start deploying rapidly without waiting for new technology to come down the line because we don't have time for that. We need reforestation and soil regeneration to eliminate emissions from land use change and land degradation. We need to switch rapidly to next-gen industrial processes for the production of things like cement and plastics to reduce emissions from those processes. And we need to do this all with massive public investments, government subsidies, carbon taxes, and in some cases even like orders to sort of transform factories to produce not refrigerators but rather solar panels and wind turbines. And this is the kind of mobilization that is called for under the Green New Deal. It's exactly what we need. But the question we have to face is this. Is it possible to do all of that while at the same time still growing the global economy at existing rates? Now, right now, the goal of virtually every nation on the planet is to grow GDP by about 3% per year. Now, that doesn't sound like very much. We're used to hearing that. It sounds like a small increment. But remember, it's exponential. And so 3% growth per year means roughly tripling the size of the global economy by the middle of the century. Okay? That's 3 times more extraction and production and consumption than we're already doing, which is almost impossible for us to imagine on a planet that is already heaving beneath the pressure of our existing economic activity. So can we decarbonize the entire global economy while at the same time tripling its size in the same period, right? It's difficult enough for us to decarbonize the existing global economy. Even that is going to be very difficult, almost impossible. It's literally impossible to imagine doing it 3 times over in the short time that we have left. So, and to answer the question, all existing economic models that we have show that, in fact, it's not possible, even with the most optimistic policy conditions. Now, why isn't everyone freaking out about this, if it's impossible to accomplish our climate targets while at the same time growing the global economy? The reason is because policymakers have been telling us, don't worry, we'll solve the problem with negative emissions technologies, and specifically one called bioenergy with carbon capture and storage, or BECCS. Who here has heard of BECCS? Oh, that's fantastic, good. It's so important to know about BECCS because it's literally baked into all of the IPCC scenarios for getting down to 2 degrees or 1.5 degrees. And the idea basically is to grow enormous tree plantations around the world which suck carbon out of the atmosphere and then chop those trees down, turn them into wood pellets, ship them around the world to power stations, burn them in power stations for energy, and capture the emissions from those power stations and store them deep under the ground. Okay. Voila, net negative emissions. And it sounds so elegant. The problem is that there's now a strong and growing scientific consensus that this is a horrible idea. And the reason is because, first of all, we don't have the technology that we need. We don't even know if it's possible to scale it up, even if we did have it properly. And even if we could scale it up, then the amount of BECCS it would require to meet our climate goals while growing the global economy would need about 2 to 3 times the land size of India, okay? Which would have to be grabbed from the global south, pushing farmers off the land, shifting from food crops to bioenergy crops, likely exacerbating mass famine, okay, in such a scenario, while contributing to biodiversity collapse because of its essentially extensive monoculture on a scale we've never seen before. Okay, so for the first time in its history, the IPCC has acknowledged this fact, and they've produced a new scenario that does not rely on BECCS for the first time in order to accomplish our goals for 1.5 degrees. Okay, and I wish I could show you the picture of this because it's quite beautiful. But effectively, it's a post-growth scenario. In the heart of the IPCC report, if you can believe it or not, right? This is now a scientific, thing. And the way they do it is this. They say that what we need to do is we need to scale down global material consumption, production and consumption, significantly, beginning with high-income nations like the UK, which consume so much, as we talked about before. So what this does, by shrinking material extraction, production, and consumption, this shrinks the energy demand of our global economy, therefore making it much easier for us to decarbonize in time to stay within the 1.5 degrees threshold. Okay. So instead of fighting uphill battle trying to decarbonize while at the same time growing, this effectively shrinks our energy demand to make it easier for us to roll out clean energy in time. Okay. Now the good news is that we know that we can do this reduction of material production and consumption, while at the same time improving human well-being and improving social indicators. I won't go into the data on this, but there's a number of countries we can look to that have low levels of per capita consumption and yet very high levels of human development, so we know it's possible. Now crucially, this is not just about changing individual behavior, okay? Not just about you deciding to compost more, etc. Okay? I mean, of course that's important, but what we need here is we need to design a new economic system for the 21st century that does not require endless growth at its core. Okay. So what does a post-growth economy look like? I'm going to leave you with 5 ideas before I hand over to Anne here that I think are a good place to start. The first idea is very simple, and maybe one you've heard of before, and that is to get rid of GDP as a measure of progress and change how we think about the success of our economy. Okay. GDP is a horrible indicator that was never designed to measure economic progress in the way that we use it today. It basically, it fails to account for the cost of economic activity. And so if you If you cut down a forest for timber and sell it to IKEA, then GDP goes up, but it does not count the cost of losing that forest as a sinkhole, as a sink for carbon, or as a habitat for animal species. We could replace GDP with a more sensible indicator, like the genuine progress indicator, for example, which effectively sources GDP and then subtracts negative social and ecological consequences from economic activity. Or we could just focus on the things that we actually want to improve, things like meaningful jobs, living wages, healthy lives, and good education. We can target those things directly without targeting GDP and just assuming that GDP is somehow magically going to deliver those things for us, which it doesn't. Number two would be to actively scale down our material production and consumption. Okay. Now, how could we do this? It sounds so abstract. It's actually really quite easy to do. We can legislate extended warranties on products like iPhones and washing machines so that they last 3 or 4 times longer than they presently do. We can ban the practice of planned obsolescence, by which businesses seek to increase turnover by selling us shitty products. We can introduce a right to repair so that we can get all of our goods repaired for cheap on the street corner without having to buy new ones, because repairs are so inordinately expensive. We can liberate public spaces from advertising so that we're not any longer subject to the incredible psychological pressure to consume just to make ourselves feel better when we don't need to. We can ban food waste. We can put high taxes on beef. We can move from models of ownership to models of usership for things like cars and lawnmowers and other things like that. And more importantly, we can introduce a cap on annual material use in the economy and tighten it each year until we're down to sustainable levels. And these are the kinds of policies that I propose the Labour Party needs to adopt urgently. It might not sound like climate policy, but it absolutely is, because the less we produce and consume, the less energy we'll need, and the easier it will be to meet our climate targets. In fact, it's the only way to meet our climate targets. Okay. Now, and this brings me to my third point. The difficult thing about this is that scaling down material production and consumption is the same as scaling down aggregate economic activity. Now, under normal conditions, when you do that, it causes problems, right? It causes crises. People lose their jobs, firms go bust, et cetera, et cetera. And so what do we do about that problem? Well, the answer would be to shorten the working week. Okay? So as our economy needs to produce less and less work is available, we redistribute available work with a shorter working week. We make sure that everyone's compensated for a reduction in hours by ensuring that we have a strong living wage policy for 20 or 30 hours a week. Okay? And we can offset the impact on small businesses with something like a universal basic income, if necessary. There are lots of ways that we can imagine to do this to make sure that we can have an economy that thrives and delivers well-being to people despite needing less labor and production. The fourth point is crucial, and that is greater equality. And this is absolutely central to any serious policy for economic transformation. Okay? Our politicians tell us these days that if we want to reduce poverty and improve people's lives, we need to grow the economy. For them, growth is always a substitute for redistribution. But we can use that same formula and reverse it for our own ends. If growth is a substitute for redistribution, then redistribution can be a substitute for growth. Okay? We live in an abundant economy. We can accomplish our social goals right now and make sure everyone has flourishing lives right now simply by distributing what we already have more fairly, without any need for additional growth at all. And this would also require us investing generously in public services and expanding the commons, things like affordable housing and so on, to ensure that people can access the goods they need without needing high levels of income to do so. Okay? So we can live well without having to have high incomes to consume privately. And the final piece I'll leave you with here is a debt jubilee. Debt is a problem in our economy, and this is maybe something that Anne will talk about more, because debt is, of course, comes with interest. Interest is an exponential function. It requires all of us who are lashed to debt to exponentially produce and consume ultimately more, simply in order to pay back debts. And this is true not just of individuals and firms, but also of states. So eliminating unpayable debt can be a dramatic help in reducing the imperative for additional growth. Okay. Now, the crucial thing about this approach that I've outlined here is that it's beneficial not just for reducing our emissions and making it easier for us to accomplish our climate goals by reducing energy demands, But also it's crucial to reducing our impact on all sorts of crucial ecological indicators, right? So deforestation, insect collapse, biodiversity loss, soil depletion, ocean acidification, et cetera, et cetera. All of these can be positively impacted by a reduction of material consumption and production, right? And so we have to think about this systematically. It's not just about emissions. It's not just about energy demand. It's about how our whole economy works in relation to the living planet. Okay? Now here's the good news I want to leave you with. We know that this is possible. We now have robust research on post-growth models that demonstrates what a post-growth economy could look like. This is not speculation. We have a very clear idea of what this would be. And moreover, we have a growing scholarly consensus that this is the kind of approach we need. Just recently, 300 academics from across Europe signed an open letter to the European Commission arguing that they need to shift urgently to post-growth models in order to accomplish our climate goals. So this is something that is really, capturing the academic community these days as well. And better yet, and the most important bit, is that we know that people want a post-growth economy. And this is against what our politicians assume. Politicians will tell us, no, there's no way we could democratically get people to buy into such a program. On the contrary, the surveys that we have are absolutely clear that over and over, people in high-income nations feel deeply that a model of ever-increasing consumption is destructive to the planet, and they want something different. And so now is the time to tap into that deep desire and articulate a possible alternative future. I think the one thing in closing that we have to be clear about is that the kind of economy that I've outlined here is ultimately not compatible with capitalism as we know it. Okay? Let's just face up to that fact. And that's okay, we shouldn't be afraid of that. We live in a culture that is obsessed with the possibilities of innovation. When was the last time you saw a smartphone or a computer and told yourself and your friends, this is the best smartphone or computer that will ever be produced, and we will never improve on it? Obviously, we would never say such a thing because we believe in the capacity for human innovation. So why is it that when it comes to the economic model we have, we're so convinced that this is the best that we could ever possibly imagine? We must and we can imagine something better, and we should not shy away from that possibility. Thank you.